Newry is a city in Northern Ireland that stands on the Clonroy River in counties Down and Armagh. It is also near the border to the Republic of Ireland, on the main route between Dublin and Belfast. The area we will be concentrating on today is Dublin Road, Newry. It is a beautiful area, and on one particular side of the road is a row of distinctive houses. It is an area loved by the people that live there. It is known as a very, very safe place to live. The neighbours all know each other, they look out for one another, and never have any concern to lock their door. One of these residents lived at number 39. She was a lovely elderly lady by the name of Moira Rankin, an 81-year-old lady who lived on her own. She was a creature of habit, independent and a pillar of the community. But lately her age was catching up on her. She had asthma, which led to chest infections, which in turn left her frail. She was a widow and mother to 8 children, and a grandmother, and should have been a great-grandmother to 7 more. But on Christmas Eve 2008, that would be taken away from her, when someone would take her life in the most gruesome, degrading and horrific way. This is one of my toughest cases yet, and I've seen them all as tough cases. This case brings a new level of depravity and sadness, so I want to give you fair warning, it's not for the faint-hearted. I just wanted to also say that I am pronouncing Moira's name properly, even though the spelling of it doesn't support it. But this is the way her name is pronounced in Northern Ireland and spelt, so don't come for me. In 2008, it was a typical Christmas Eve morning. The plan was that Moira's daughter, Brenda, would call for her to spend Christmas with her and her family, but she had a very bad cold and chest infection, so Moira asked her to collect her on Christmas morning instead. Early that Christmas morning, Brenda was concerned when she was unable to reach her mother to arrange what time to pick her up. Brenda was checking the time to see when her mother might be awake, and when it was getting that bit late, she was surprised when Moira hadn't rung. So at around 9:45 a.m, she rang and there was no answer. So when she came out of the shower, she rang again and still had no answer. All in all, she rang around 3 to 4 times. A sense of panic was rising in Brenda, and so she decided that she needed to go to number 39 Dublin Road, Newry, to see if her mother was okay. Brenda, on the journey over, definitely sensed there was something wrong. The whole way to Newry, she tried to stay calm and persuade herself that Moira was either in the shower or overslept, but was fearful that she may have slipped and fallen. But Brenda at this time had no idea what she would be facing when she got to the house, and how her life was to change, not just over the next 3 years, but for the rest of her life. Moira's brother-in-law had already driven around to Dublin Road, and he met Brenda at the gate when she arrived. He had also been concerned when he couldn't get in contact with Moira. Brenda met him as he ran down the front steps. He told her, "Your mother is gone, she's gone." As Brenda proceeded to enter the house and go up the stairs, she rang for the police. Her phone call to the police was absolutely heartbreaking to listen to. I can't imagine the sight that faced her. On entering her mother's bedroom, Brenda was confronted with her worst nightmare. There lay her mother at 81, naked, bruised and battered. The room was in disarray around her dead mother, and all Brenda could do was cry out for her mother. The police arrived and they soon realised that they needed to act fast. Their attention was drawn to the rear of the property. They could see that the back door was lying ajar, and that this could have been the way the perpetrator left the house. The back of the house was very private, and someone could have easily slipped out this way unnoticed. But a closer look at the scene threw up another scenario. It now appeared that the house hadn't been burgled. There was no damage caused to the front door. There was no sign of anything being disturbed downstairs, and no sign of anything being forced or jimmied or kicked in. Moira's purse and handbag were still there, so if it had been a burglar, those items would have been taken or gone through. So to the police, this tightened the circle of people to look at. They determined that whoever killed Moira knew her and had been let into the house by her, or they had a key. Of course the family were the first to be looked at, and it became apparent quite quickly that they were not involved. As the police interviewed family, friends and neighbours, the forensic team made a gruesome discovery as to the murder weapon. It was realised that the crucifix which had been fixed to the wall over Moira's bed had been deliberately pulled down. This is what was used to beat Moira to death. And not only that, but she was also violated with it, to imply that Moira had been sexually assaulted and killed by a man. It wasn't long before the media got hold of the case, and people were shocked by the depravity of how Moira died. Moira was a religious person who loved God, who said her prayers every night before going to sleep, and to be killed by the symbol of God was next level. The question on most people's minds when these details were released: what in God's name went on in this house, and what sort of person would do this to an elderly person like Moira? All the neighbours had been questioned, bar two, those that lived right next door. The house was quiet and police presumed they were away. A man from the house, though, approached a police officer and asked what was going on. His name was Richard Durkin. He had a wife, Karen Walsh, and a young son that was 2 years old. They were a wealthy couple from Dublin who used Dublin Road as their weekend away home. So a little bit about Karen. She had grown up in a middle-class Galway family of high achievers, where education was a priority. The 43-year-old's father was a school principal who taught at Loughrea School until his retirement, and as a teenager Karen attended Salt Hill Secondary School in Galway City before completing a degree in biochemistry in NUI Galway. In a surprise twist, she opted to train as a beautician after leaving college. However, after finishing the course, she travelled to England and completed a pharmacy degree at the University of Sunderland. She would meet and then marry Richard Durkin in 2004, and they would have their son in 2006. Richard Durkin was a tax consultant, auditor, chartered accountant and financial advisor by trade. Originally from Sligo, he was also co-director, along with his wife, of a chemist's dispensing business, which traded as George's Street Pharmacy on upmarket South Great George's Street, Dublin. The couple moved in the highest of circles among the Dublin elite. Richard also worked alongside Noreen O'Sullivan, Assistant Commissioner to An Garda Síochána, on the PSI, where he represented the public interest. From Monday to Friday they lived in Dublin's plush Berkeley Court Hotel, taking advantage of the Celtic Tigers property boom to rent out the home they owned in the city. Karen liked to keep a firm hold on the illusion of youth, with regular Botox visits to Dublin's exclusive Blackrock Clinic, an anti-aging treatment she had been routinely undergoing for 12 years. In 2007, they bought a 5-bedroom property on Dublin Road, Newry, for £400,000 as a holiday house for relaxation. At that point, they seemed the poster family for a resurgent Ireland, prosperous and enjoying life on both sides of the border. But all was not what it seemed, and Karen's carefully constructed facade was about to implode, with tragic consequences for her gentle, new, elderly neighbour, Moira Rankin. The word which came up again and again when people that knew her were asked what was she like: enigma, an apparently doting mother, yet she spent Christmas Eve downing a bottle of vodka and rowing bitterly with her husband. She was a so-called socialite, but rarely left her Newry home, appearing to prefer to drink alone. But before she ever met and married Richard, and after she had completed her pharmacy degree at Sutherland University, she had moved to South Armagh village, just 5 miles from Newry, to do her pre-reg, which is a type of on-the-job training. She dated a Newry man, and it turned out to be an ill-fated affair, apparently conducted in the face of opposition from her boyfriend's family. Karen also lived in Clough Heights, less than a mile along the Dublin Road from her later family home. By then she had acquired a reputation for heavy drinking and erratic behaviour. Tales of horror from neighbours formed that period, including their distress when it became clear that one of Karen's notorious drinking binges, on which she would disappear, had seen her abandon her little Jack Russell, locked in the house for more than a week with no food or water. The neighbours would push food through the letterbox for the pitiful animal, eventually calling the police when it became clear she was not returning. I have no words already for this woman, but I'm sure I'll think of a few as we go along. The dog, you'll all be glad to know, was taken away by the authorities and rehomed. It was rumoured that when Karen left, people that lived on the same street as her had a party to celebrate her leaving. So when Karen and her husband bought the house in Newry, she was no different really. She had her husband to pick up the slack when she was drinking, so her son was protected from her drinking as much as possible. The neighbours would say they didn't see her much, and some said they'd never even spoken to her. But the ones that did speak to her would say she had an inappropriate interest in other people's business, and who could be persistent in her questioning. This did not make her very popular. But there was one neighbour that Karen made herself known to, and that was Moira Rankin. She lived right next door. Moira was a compassionate and motherly pensioner who enjoyed her lively retirement, surrounded by her children, grandchildren and friends. Richard was friendly and visibly seen going in and out of the property, but Karen was like a ghost. The neighbours expected to see her as much as the husband, but didn't. Karen didn't socialise locally. She didn't go to the local bars or hotels, preferring to drink at home. After Moira's body was found, the neighbours of Dublin Road gathered to see what was happening. The only neighbour that didn't appear was Karen. All the neighbours were questioned by police, and by the time Richard had spoken to them, it was soon realised that Karen was the last one to see Moira the night of the murder. She was brought in for questioning on the 27th of December, along with her husband Richard. Karen gave an account that she had called to Moira on Christmas Eve at around 11:30 p.m, bringing a card and a bottle of vodka in hand. It would come out later that this was a common occurrence that Moira didn't appreciate, but she was too kind and gentle to tell Karen not to be calling. So Moira, being so kind, led to Karen taking advantage of her, calling at all hours of the night, bringing her presents of drink, but then drinking them herself. Moira was not a drinker at all, and was very uncomfortable with the situation. Moira would even contact a friend of hers to call to have an excuse to get rid of her. This is so familiar. There is nothing as bad as having a drunk call to you at all times of the day or night, and talk absolute rubbish, thinking they are funny and interesting. The woe is me and the constant repeating themselves. I think, unfortunately, we all have a friend or family member like this. As I said, Karen admitted being at the house, that she had called and only stayed for half an hour, went home at midnight and slept in until midday, and Moira was alive when she left, that they had hugged and kissed each other before she helped Moira into bed. As Karen was interviewed and statements had been taken from neighbours that contradicted her account of what happened that night, the police got an extension to keep her longer. When Karen appeared in court to be officially charged, the courtroom was packed. Karen only spoke to confirm her name and that she had understood the charges, and she pleaded not guilty. No bail application was made at this stage. On the 7th of January 2009, Moira's funeral took place at St Mary of the Assumption Church in Newry. A guard of honour was formed by the local primary school children as the coffin left the church. On the 27th of January, Karen appeared in court in relation to bail. This would be the first of many hearings before going to trial. It was reported by the police that when they initially spoke to Karen as part of their general inquiry with all the neighbours, Karen had admitted that she was at Moira's house, that she had called to another neighbour's house that night with the present of a bottle of vodka, but that neighbour wasn't home, so she called to Moira instead. She said that she drank some vodka directly from the bottle, which I'm sure was nothing to her. Karen had told detectives 3 different times of when she had gone to Moira's house. Details of the initial investigation were also outlined, informing the court of the evidence which they believe pointed in the direction of Karen being the main suspect. The police said there was an attempt to clean the scene, and they had evidence of some unexplained phone calls made from the house early that morning between 7:31 and 7:37 a.m. They said the numbers dialed were very similar to Richard Durkin's numbers. They also had a witness who matched Karen's description, sitting on the wall having a cigarette outside Moira's house at 7:30 a.m, even though she had told police that she had slept in until midday. After her arrest, it was noticed that Karen had bruising to her body. She said they were bruises because of pulling heavy items upstairs, but forensics said they were not consistent with this story. Another reason she gave for the bruises was she had fallen down the stairs at a hotel where she lived, and that an ambulance had been called for her at that time. When police checked the call-outs for the date given, no ambulances had been dispatched to the hotel on that day. Karen was refused bail and remanded in custody. However, 2 weeks later, Karen was back in court once more looking to get bail. The defence stated that the police had not come through with any solid evidence that Karen was responsible for Moira's death and that bail should be granted, and so it was. £6,000 was the bail amount, which to me was buttons for such a serious crime. She was made to hand over her passport and banned from entering Newry, except when she had to report to the police. She was directed to live in Dublin, but by June Karen was rearrested. Police had received information from a former inmate that Karen had told her she intended to leave the country if she felt things weren't going her way. She said that she would alter her appearance through plastic surgery and secure a false passport. Police in Dublin also at that time informed the PSNI, which is the Police Service Northern Ireland, that a plastic surgeon in Dublin had contacted them to complain about Karen. He had received a bad cheque for work he'd done on Karen. With this, police rearrested her and she was put back into prison. However, by the following Monday, she was back in court again when the police applied to have her bail revoked. Her defence said that the police had overreacted and that Karen was in fact only having Botox injections at the Blackrock Clinic, which she had been getting for several years. Bail was granted and immediately the PSNI lodged an appeal, and once again Karen's ass was landed back in prison. On June 17, 2009, the following Wednesday, she appeared at the High Court in Belfast for the bail issue to be heard. A detective again outlined the conversation a former inmate had with Karen, where she said she would flee the country and change her appearance if she thought she was going to be found guilty. A second detective also told of the doctor from the Blackrock Clinic who gave Botox to Karen and told how she had inquired about more extensive plastic surgery. When Karen's cheque for the Botox bounced, he googled her name and contacted the Gardaí straight away. It was also revealed that DNA taken from a crucifix that was used to kill Moira matched with Karen's DNA. Also, DNA was found on Moira's face and body, and it also matched. Even after all this, bail was still granted, but under stricter rules. This time, Karen had to stay in Belfast and was not allowed back into the Republic of Ireland. A file was completed by the PSNI by August 2009 and forwarded for approval for trial to the prosecution. But before a trial date could be set, the bail was back in question again in February 2010. Karen wanted to get back to the Republic of Ireland, using the separation from her son as a reason. Again, the prosecution put forward the same reasons why she shouldn't be allowed back over the border, and the defence put forward the same reasoning, with the added bonus of she was now a broke woman living in Belfast permanently, that her and her husband Richard were facing financial ruin, trying to maintain properties in Dublin, Newry and Belfast. The application was denied. After this, a preliminary hearing took place in the Belfast Magistrate Court on Wednesday the 12th of May 2010. A brief outline would be presented to the judge of the proceedings that would take place at the actual trial. The defence did not present anything, and bail was continued under the same conditions. After numerous delays, due to Karen firing her legal team constantly, the trial began on Wednesday the 14th of September 2011. A jury of 7 men and 5 women were selected, and Judge Hart presided over the proceedings. The following Tuesday, Karen appeared before the Belfast Crown Court. The prosecution was first to give opening statements. They said Karen had murdered Moira that night and said that she admitted to being at Moira's house. They said that during this visit that Karen had sat on top of Moira and assaulted her, describing Moira as fragile and delicate. He alleged that Karen had struck Moira with a wooden crucifix that had hung over the bed, stripping her naked and sexually assaulting her with the crucifix after she had died. Evidence to support this was DNA, phone records, witness testimonies and physical evidence left at the scene. Photographs of the scene were shown to the jury, including the body of poor Moira. Moira's brother-in-law was first to the stand, and he spoke how his wife was worried about her after they could not get through on the phone. He arrived that morning and let himself in. He said the living room was in a bit of a mess, and when he called out and got no answer, he went up to the bedroom and saw Moira lying on the floor dead. He left the house straight away, and this is when Moira's daughter Brenda arrived. When Brenda was on the stand, she recalled entering the house and making her way upstairs while on the phone to the police. Brenda said she saw her mother lying on the floor partially covered with a blanket. She thought initially that she had died from natural causes, but as she moved through the room, she knew that there was something more. She noticed clumps of hair all over her mother's bedroom, and poor Brenda wept on the stand as she described how she knelt over her mother's bruised body to say a prayer. The family, as they took to the stand one by one, described Moira as a very meticulous woman when it came to her house and her personal appearance. She always kept her hair done, dressed very well, and they said how distressed they all were because of the way she was left in a state of undress. They would say their mother would have been mortified to be seen this way. The court was also told that Moira did not drink spirits, and only on occasion would she have a small sherry. Next to the stand was Paul Rafferty, a neighbour of Moira's. He said that morning at around 7:20 a.m. he had heard voices outside of his home and had looked outside his front window. A woman with untidy blonde hair, wearing a red jumper, was sitting outside on the wall of Moira's house. Paul was shown a picture of the back of Karen at cross-examination, and he admitted that this photo did not match the description he had given to the police. The hair was longer and not as frizzy. He was also shown a picture of a jumper, but he couldn't confirm that this was the jumper he had seen on the woman that morning. The forensic medical officer put the time of death as late on Christmas Eve or early Christmas morning. Police also gave evidence of their interaction with Karen straight after the murder, and they said Karen had repeatedly asked if Moira had been beaten. The police asked her why she thought she was beaten and not stabbed or strangled. That to ask if she had been beaten specifically gave rise to her knowing how Moira had died. Karen had told the detectives that she had gone to Moira's house just before midnight and had brought a card and a litre of vodka with her. They had sat in Moira's bedroom, and Karen said she had been drinking the vodka, taking swigs straight from the bottle. She said she felt uneasy about leaving Moira on her own as she sounded wheezy, but that Moira had assured her she'd be fine. In that interview, she told police she left the house at around 2:30 a.m. She continued and told detectives that the next morning her husband Richard had told her something was going on next door and that the house had been sealed off. Then the evidence had been shown to the jury that 7 calls had been made from the house after Moira died, and evidence of DNA found on certain items inside the house, including the 3/4 full bottle of vodka. The following morning, the state pathologist gave evidence of Moira's injuries. He said she had suffered several blows to her head and 16 fractures to her ribs, and that her underlying medical condition, asthma and high blood pressure, had resulted in her death. Moira had bruising on her forehead and nose. The bruising on her chin was consistent with the crown of thorns of the crucifix that were found broken next to her body. This is just the saddest thing ever. He also ruled out the sexual assault had been caused by sexual intercourse, but it was caused by a foreign object, such as the crucifix. He said the blows to Moira's head were so severe that it formed a blood clot in her brain. No presence of alcohol had been found in her system. He also confirmed that the injuries to Moira were not consistent with the fall, nor was the fact that her hair was torn out could be consistent with the fall either. Karen took to the stand then and went over her life story, which I won't bore you with again. She said that she had called to Moira's house that night, and Moira had buzzed her in, and she followed her voice to the bedroom. Moira was sitting in her rocking chair, covered with her duvet. She kissed her hello, and then Moira went to her bed and wore her nebulizer as her breathing was very shallow. Karen sat on the bed and drank the vodka from the bottle and ended up lying at the end of the bed while they chatted. Karen would say in court, quote, "I know it seems horrendous and terrible now, but it was Christmas time and she was fine about it. To me, this sounds like my worst nightmare. Imagine being an elderly person, not in the full of your health and 81 years of age, putting up with a drunk like this in the middle of the night on Christmas Eve. Give me strength. I have to say my patience is wearing thin with this case." Karen would also say on the stand that she had gone downstairs to the living room to see if she could find an inhaler, as Moira's breathing was getting worse. She said she had debated on whether just to leave her or offer for her to go home with her so she could keep an eye on her. She said she made this offer, but Moira said she'd be fine. Karen also testified that while she was in the house, she had not touched the phone, any figurines that were on the landing, the remote for the stair lift or her pill case that was in the kitchen open on the floor the next morning. Karen had no explanation for the discrepancies between interviews she had given to police and the testimony she was now giving. The prosecution then asked why it was that after being so worried about Moira's condition, looking for an inhaler and asking her to go next door with her, then sit down and eat a mince pie, and then simply left without saying goodbye. Karen said she had already wished Moira a happy Christmas and hugged and kissed her. Finally, the prosecutor put it to her, quote, that it was not normal to call to an elderly woman that late at night, that the accused had gone there in order to drink the vodka to avoid the disapproval of her husband. He also put it to her that Moira had said that she shouldn't be at her house drinking, rather that she should be with her son. Christmas was for family. Karen said, quote, I have done nothing. I was very nice to that woman. I have all along told the truth about this. Notice she doesn't use Moira's name, distancing herself from her. The Crown's barrister put it to the court that Moira had been critical of Karen and her life choices, and that she was ruining her life, that she should have been next door with her son and her husband, but instead Karen was in her house in the middle of the night drinking on Christmas. This had enraged Karen. Fueled with drink, she attacked her elderly neighbour. He said Karen had punched Moira and then pulled the crucifix down from the wall and beat Moira with it, striking her on the head. The prosecution then put it to Karen that she had panicked and started to throw things around the room, took off Moira's clothes and staged a sexual assault to make it look like a male intruder had done this. The prosecution then asked Karen, was it not true that she had used Moira's home phone after she discovered she was locked out and went back into the house to ring her husband, that the numbers dialed were one or two numbers out from the actual phone numbers belonging to her husband? Karen denied this outright, insisting she had done nothing wrong. On the 3rd of October 2011, closing statements began with the prosecution. He said that Karen had told a tissue of lies. Though the case against the accused was circumstantial, the evidence against Karen was overwhelming. The defence called into question some of the scenarios the prosecution had outlined in their narrative of the crime, and said that the Crown had failed to prove beyond a reasonable doubt. The judge began his charge that afternoon and completed it the following morning. On Tuesday, the 4th of October 2011, the jury returned with their verdict. They found Karen guilty of murder. It took them less than 2 hours to come to this verdict. Karen had no reaction, and her husband, who had stood by her all through the trial, had been outside the courtroom when the verdict was read. He had arrived late, the courtroom was packed, and the doors locked, so he couldn't get in. As Karen was being led out from the court, she turned to the judge and said, quote, I'm completely innocent. And the judge in turn told her to prepare herself for a lengthy minimum sentence, as this was a brutal and horrific attack on an elderly and defenceless woman. The family afterwards outside the courthouse said they felt no euphoria from the verdict, but rather a feeling of calm and peace that justice had been done. It was also revealed that the nightgown that Moira was wearing that night was never recovered. The police looked everywhere for it, even delaying returning the house for 18 months to the family. On the 25th of October 2011, a sentencing hearing was held. The defence put forward their final say, and Karen continued to claim her innocence. No surprise there then. The family entered their victim impact statement to be considered also in the sentencing. The judge said it would take a few days to go over everything that was submitted. On Friday, the 28th of October 2011, Karen was told what her minimum would be. The judge admitted that Karen had not set out to kill Moira that night, and he felt that Karen tried to resuscitate her. But also, though, she had degraded Moira by attempting to make it look like she was attacked by a male intruder, by removing her clothing and sexually assaulting her. Karen was sentenced to a minimum term of 20 years. By November 2011, Karen had lodged an appeal. It also came out that Karen got free legal aid and had changed her legal team 4 times at the cost of £15,000 before the trial even began, and it was said she did this in order to delay the trial. She was warned that if she kept doing this, she would end up with no legal representation at all. It was also put to the justice system that she should repay this money, as she came from a wealthy background. How she got free legal aid in the first place is beyond me. The total cost for Karen's legal team amounted to £218,000. Karen's appeal was put forward in 2015 after several delays. Of course, Karen had changed her legal team once again. This appeal failed and Karen was frog-marched back to prison again. After the appeal failed, Moira's daughter Brenda made a statement to the press. She said, quote, "There is a very evil, dangerous person who has manipulated every aspect of the court system. It seems that Karen Walsh had been pulling the strings of the legal system and they had indulged her at every whim." She thanked the Lord Chief Justice for talking about her mother and bringing Moira back into the centre of focus in the legal proceedings. Karen continued over the years trying to have her conviction overturned. She applied to have her case heard at the Supreme Court in London, the highest court in the UK. She seemed to become more willing to admit that she caused injury to Moira, but this was too little too late and the application was rejected. Brenda, Moira's daughter, would have the last say. She said, quote, "The holiday period is always difficult for her and her siblings, and she still gets flashbacks despite her best efforts to be strong and carry on. Although her mother was missed at important family events like weddings, births and Christmas, the happiness, smiles and laughter reminded her of her own childhood growing up and the lovely home that her mother had made for them. We miss both our parents, but we are sad that Mummy did not live to see any of her 7 great-grandchildren, but that it is important to pass on the lovely memories to her grandchildren and great-grandchildren. It was more important to remember how her mother lived than dwell on the way she died."